If you've been learning Mandarin for months or maybe even years, you know loads of words but still freeze when you try and speak, this is the video for you. Maybe you're memorizing loads of vocabulary only to forget it the next day, or even worse still, you remember it, but you're just unable to use it in real conversations. I used to be there, and it's this one shift that I'm going to be sharing in this video that completely changes the game. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the same method that I used to get conversationally fluent in Mandarin fast, and the method that I've been teaching to over thousands of students over the last few years over at Chongqing Chinese. Today, I'm going to be showing you how learning individual words out of context keeps you stuck, and how learning in chunks will skyrocket your ability to communicate in Mandarin. Let's get started. You see, most Mandarin learners are told just learn more words. And what that looks like for most of you guys is learning individual words out of context. For example, you might learn the word lai means to come, but never actually know the gazillion different ways of using lai for it to make sense in a sentence. Worse still, when you try and speak, you end up trying to say a sentence, translating from English one word at a time, and trying to impose your mother tongue's grammar on the whole sentence. I feel it's kind of like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. So the end result is a mashup of Chinese words, English grammar or your mother tongue's grammar, and a ton of hesitation. And this is why lots of people can study Mandarin for years and years and years and not really get anywhere when it comes in terms of speaking. It's not a motivation problem, it's definitely not an intelligence problem, it's simply just a method problem. I remember one of my students, Nina, when she first came to me, she was able to recognize quite a lot of Mandarin words. You know, she regularly read stories on dual Chinese and she enjoyed doing so, but she was just unable to get her words out when she went to speak. And when she did try, every single sentence that she was trying to make would be like directly translated from English word for word. So instead of learning just more words, we focused on chunks and common sentence patterns. Chunks like 跟什么什么比起来. Or for example, 对什么什么感兴趣. The kind of chunks that I now teach loads of students. And with a bit of practice, she stopped translating as much word for word and started sounding like someone who actually, speaks Mandarin. Her ability to communicate skyrocketed just from learning chunks and learning in chunks and practicing using them. And it wasn't even necessarily because she was learning more. It was more of a case that she was learning slightly differently. And I've given this analogy before that learning individual words out of context is a bit like trying to do a 2,000 piece puzzle, but without the picture on the box to guide you. Whereas if you learn in chunks, it's like some of these pieces of the puzzle have already been connected together and you have the full picture there to refer to. So all of a sudden, a 2,000 piece puzzle, because of these connected pieces, becomes more like a 200 piece puzzle, and you start to actually be able to see where things go. And this analogy I actually stole from one of my students, Christopher, who kind of used this to explain the way that he found using my system with chunking. The key takeaway for you guys is that learning chunks in context is a real game changer when it comes to speaking Mandarin. But I guarantee at this point you're probably thinking, oh, that sounds really great, but where do I actually find these chunks that you're talking about, Will? If you're willing to do what's necessary and commit years and potentially years and years of your life to learning Mandarin, would you rather use boring resources that you hate every minute of using, or things you actually enjoy? So this is the reason why at an intermediate level, I strongly recommend from moving away from things that you don't enjoy. Like, start relying more on, podcasts that you genuinely want to listen to, watching TV shows in the language, books, content that you actually care about. And this is where real, reusable conversational chunks live. This is where you can find them. But here, this is also why I built my Chongqing Chinese email community, because sometimes, even with the right resources, you might be left guessing which chunks actually matter. So I share my free PDFs and my chunk of the week to try and help thousands of intermediate learners find useful chunks that they need to learn in order to grow in their conversational abilities in Mandarin. So the link's in the description, it's completely free if you want to check it out. Now let's say that you've collected a load of useful chunks, or you've gone and looked at my chunks in my PDFs and my chunk of the week newsletter. The next question is, how do I actually learn them? How do I actually learn to use these chunks? I remember when I was first starting learning Mandarin, feeling completely overwhelmed by the number of different things I needed to learn in order to just start to have conversations in Mandarin. That completely changed when I started using what I call chunk-based close deletion flashcards combined with space repetition. Now that's an absolute mouthful. Instead of explaining the theory, let me just show you what that looks like, as many of you have asked me to do so. So first of all, let's start with what a bad flashcard would look like. If we were trying to learn the word 相对来说, a bad flashcard on the front would say 相对来说, and on the back it would say relatively speaking, and you do that. But what a good flashcard, in my opinion, using my chunk-based method, would be on the front it would say something like 它的发音 and then a blank, 比较标准, okay, and on the front as well would also have a little hint in brackets saying relatively speaking, or a Chinese definition depending on your level. And on the back, the answer to this would be 相对来说. So now you've got the whole context for how 相对来说 is used. Let's look at another example. So we have the chunk 没怎么. Okay, so on the front, if we were just going to do a bad flashcard, it would be on the front it would say 没怎么, and on the back it would say didn't really. But if we wanted to make a good flashcard, on the front it would say 我今天中午 blank, and then 吃饭. Okay, and on the back we'd have the answer being 没怎么, and obviously, as I mentioned earlier, it'd have this little prompt to make it more specific, something along the lines of didn't really, or something in Chinese if you think that would be more helpful. Let's look at our final example to really make this make sense. So on the front you would have 感兴趣, on the back you'd have interested. That would be a bad flashcard. But if we had on the front 我 blank 中文很 and then blank, then on the back you could have 对感兴趣, and there you've learned like not just a chunk but actually like a really common sentence pattern, and the answer to that would be 我对中文很感兴趣, which obviously I hope you guys all are. So it's really simple. You blank out the chunk, you keep the original context in which it was found in, hopefully gathered from your your TVs, movies, whatever it is, or your learning resources, and you add a definition either in English or Chinese if it's needed, if it's not very clear from the context, because you need to make your flashcards really, really specific. And there you go. That's exactly how I teach my students to build flashcards. And let me tell you this, when I switched to this style, my speaking skills literally took off. But this alone still isn't enough. Here's the gap most learners hit. How do I go from Anki to actually speaking confidently? You see, there's a bit of a problem here. Sometimes the chunks you learn, although Anki can really be helpful to a certain point, they get stuck in Anki and they don't actually appear in your real conversation. So how on earth do we bridge that gap? At this point, learners usually do one of two things. Either they go on a hunt and start collecting a load of different techniques, or they build themselves a system that just forces them to get using these chunks in conversation and speaking them naturally. Hopefully what we're going to do in this part of the video is looking at doing the second one and build yourself a simple system. So I think babies do two things incredibly well that we probably overlook a little bit in language learning. First of all, they copy what they hear loads. Secondly, they play around with the language. Now, they might not sound that profound, but let's get into why these 2 points can really, really help us in our acquisition of these new chunks that we're learning. So basically, that's exactly what we need to do. The first step that we can do is shadowing. So a simple game of listen and repeat. I recommend starting off with something called echoing. So you listen to a sentence and then you wait a couple of seconds and repeat. And shadowing is the case of where you repeat almost immediately after you hear the sentence. Now the second is a bit more complicated. I'm going to give you some examples for this one. That's sentence transformation, which basically means playing around with the language, swapping things in and out, using structures that you already know, or using it actually to learn new structures as well. So let's look at some of the chunks we used earlier. So we had 它的发音相对来说比较标准. You can first change the subject. For example, you could say 你的中文发音相对来说比较标准. Okay, so that would be one example. Now the other, with the second chunk we had 没怎么. Okay, our initial sentence was 我今天没怎么吃饭. So we can swap out the time, and we can also swap out like the activity as well. So we're going to keep the structure of the sentence exactly the same. We could say 我最近没怎么运动. Okay. Or for example, if we're going back to the 吃饭, we could say 我昨天没怎么吃饭. You could even turn it into a question by using another chunk that you might already know. So for example, 你是不是今天没怎么吃饭? And then the final example will change what we're being interested in. So 我对中文很感兴趣. You could say 我对中国文化很感兴趣. And again, you've learned how the chunk works. that you know that the thing that you're interested in is going between 对 and 感兴趣, and then you just change it. So 我对中国文化很感兴趣. Or you could change it, the person, and you could change the kind of style, so you could turn it into a question. 你对中国文化感兴趣吗? And there you go. So I believe this is how chunks stop being just study material and start becoming your own. You start to own them for yourself. So if this approach makes sense to you, the next step for you is really, really simple. Start seeing, learning and using chunks every day. And if you want some more free chunks, guidance and resources to help you get started with doing exactly that, then check out the Chunking Chinese email community. Now if you want to learn a few brilliant sentence starter chunks in context, then I would highly recommend checking out this video next, as I'm sure it will help you with just doing that.